Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here for the August 9th, 2021 City Council work session. Ms. Fleeka, would you call the meeting to order, please?
Mr. Rogers.
Here.
Ms. Ramsey.
Here.
Mayor Pons.
Here.
Vice Mayor Dent.
Here.
Mr. Maslin.
Here.
Okay, so that takes us to items for City Council meeting of August 12th. Mr. City Manager?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. We've got a couple of public hearings. The first one is to review the updated comprehensive plan. We're going to have a discussion about that today. And then also the zoning text amendment for the 4-person pause on that permit process. And then under new business, we have the acceptance of stated good repair money from VDOT, a renewal of the joint exercise of powers agreement with the Colonial Group Home Commission, and then finally the reappointment of Nina Simone to the Williamsburg Library.
Any questions for the manager? Okay, so this is an opportunity now for public comment. If anybody would like to come to the podium, address council, please come forward and state your name and address, and you got 5 minutes. Okay, no rush to the podium, so we'll move on to background presentations and discussions. First is item A, PCR number 21-005, 21 Comprehensive Plan Update. Ms. Murphy.
Yes.
We also see we have the chairperson with us, Elaine McBeth. Welcome.
Mayor Pons and members of City Council, Elaine McBeth, Planning Commission Chair, and I are going to give you a brief overview of our comprehensive plan update, and we'll start off with Elaine McBeth first, and then I'll go ahead with the PowerPoint presentation. So,
Thank you. Welcome.
Hello, how are you all?
Well, thanks.
Well, I'm Elaine McBeth, and you all know me. I'm here in support of Carolyn's presentation. I mean, she's obviously the one giving the presentation today. I am here also, I think, if we have discussion later on, to answer any questions that I might be able to help. But just as a simple introduction, in addition to those named on the cover page of what we have transmitted to you, this multi-100-page document, I also would like to thank members of City Council who participated in the process, most especially Caleb, who's actually a sitting member of Planning Commission when we started this several years ago. However, regardless of all of the contributions of Planning Commission, the largest credit goes to Carolyn and her team. I would be remiss if I didn't say that about 5,000 times. And Carolyn and her team, but yeah, most especially Carolyn. I mean, this is a huge body of work that she has shepherded for years, and we all, as members of the city, really owe her a debt here. And on the broader areas, I guess I'd like to thank both Carolyn and Andy Edwards, who has passed, was a member of this Planning Commission for many years. And the two of them together are truly the North Star of this document. I mean, every word, semicolon, the colors and everything else are really attributed to them. And so I just wanted to have those words of praise at the very beginning. I'll let Carolyn give her presentation. This is really her time, and I'll stay forward for the discussion if I can answer any questions. Thank you.
Well, thank you for all your leadership on Planning Commission. Having been there and gone through this comprehensive planning process several times, I know it's a lot of work. Thank you, Ms. Murphy.
Yep. So as you know, this is our 2021 comprehensive plan update. And with our new comprehensive plan, this is the actual finished document. I want people to see it. I think council picked up members. The copies are also available on the planning's website. There's a copy in the library, and the planning department has a copy. So basically, as you can tell from this document, it has a new design, a new layout, and reorganized the chapters. We have a new color scheme, which was basically blue and gold throughout, a new orientation of the text to look, instead of one big long page of written text, we broke it up into 2 columns to help it make it a little bit better to read. We added a preamble section that was basically part of the goals in the old comp plan, and we broke that out at the commission's request because they said that was more of a past of what the comprehensive plans were. We did a new chapter layout. We started this, believe it or not, in 2018. We had 32 work sessions, a neighborhood forum, a business forum, a community forum, 2 meetings with the EDA, And another neat thing about the document is we can add links to the text. So you don't have to put all those supporting documents in the back of the book anymore. You can just do links to them, and you'll see those throughout with a here in red usually and underline. So we start with chapter 1, which was the goals. And the goals are the same goals that were in the previous plan. So that's one thing when we started doing this update, we were told, planning department was told, we're just going to update the information in the chapters. Well, as you can see, it went into a bigger document than that. So we got the character of the city, the vitality, the transportation, the public safety. All of these chapters were basically the goals are the same goals as were in the previous one. So chapter 2 is the land use chapters. We updated all that land use information. We included maps and calculations and described land use classifications. One thing I would note in that chapter is on page 2-3 is where we talk about the different classifications for residential and commercial and so forth in the city. We have 15% residential, 6% commercial, institution is 14%, public and semi-public's 3%, transportation is 13%, and parks is 11%, and 26% is environmental. So we have a lot of environmental lands in the city. Undeveloped land was 12%, but about half of that is residential. So you have about 6% that can be used for commercial. So if you take that land in the 6% commercial, you've got somewhere in the neighborhood of 12% of commercial land in the city. So that's why when you see a lot of planning, rezonings and those things that come to city council, we stress pretty hard on trying to keep our commercial property. That's a reason why, because that, as you know, helps to keep our property taxes down. Chapter 3 is population, and that was basically just updating the information from the census, school enrollments, and educational attainment, basically just all data. Community character, we updated the entrance corridor information. We also had in there the recommendation of council a year or so ago about updating the design review guidelines. And one thing I would point out, we also recommend the wayfinding, sorry, I'm getting choked in this mess, and entrance signage review and installation. Next chapter is neighborhoods. We updated the neighborhood owner-occupied and non-owner-occupied table. We also updated information for the downtown, midtown, northeast triangle and other areas of the city. You'll see those all in their own sections. We changed the office land use destination to low-density, single-family detached residential for 530 Mill Neck Road. So in this comp plan update, there were only 2 parcels that we're recommending changing the comprehensive plan designation. One is 530 Mill Neck Road. And here's a map of it, and basically shows you where it's located. Here's John Tyler Lane at the top, Mill Neck. This is the CVS and the bank and the Getty office. So the comp plan is recommending to change that office land use to single-family detached. And the main reason for that is that you can see that this is accessed on Mill Neck Road, and it's basically surrounded by residents instead of office use. Chapter 6 is housing. We updated this section using the Williamsburg Association of Realtors housing study that was completed in 2018, which was conducted by Dr. Sarah Stafford. We updated the neighborhood housing charts with the average cost per lot or unit by neighborhood. We also put in that section recommendations developed for the workforce affordable housing strategy, retain and support a diverse housing stock, and study alternatives housing options, etc., are in this chapter. The economy, we updated the employment, tourism, lodging, income sales, taxable sales, fiscal capacity, and we looked at trends and future projections. Chapter 8, the commercial and economic development, we updated the businesses. We added a link to the downtown vibrancy study. That's one of the ones I mentioned. Instead of attaching it, we now have a link to it. We updated the downtown, midtown, northeast triangle, quarter path, high street, and other commercial areas. And you will notice in there we added maps. That's one of the things that I think you'll notice in this plan from the previous plan. We did a lot of extra maps, and especially for neighborhoods, parks, those types of things, we tried to outline where they were and put a map in there to help individuals find them. Chapter 9 was institution. That's basically updating the William & Mary and Colonial Williamsburg information. This was the other recommendation that we looked at changing the land use designation for 7219 Pocahontas Trail from Colonial Williamsburg support to conservation areas. And we support changing the comp plan designation for the visitor center upon the submission of an acceptable master plan. There was some discussion at Planning Commission on that, and the commission was pretty strong about, let's not put a designation on it currently. Let's wait and see what comes in and what it needs to be rather than try to guess what it should be and base it on a master plan. And here's that 7219 Pocahontas Trail property. This is the old WADA site that was rezoned and changed. This is the leftover of that parcel that was bought by the conservation, the Civil War Trust. So Colonial Williamsburg has sold that property, so we're looking to change that from Colonial Williamsburg support to conservation areas. And I would say for both of those parcels, staff did send out notices to the property owners for these designations, and we have not heard any negative comments back on that. Chapter 10 is public schools and library. We updated the information for the schools and the library. We added the public school enrollment by neighborhood. We added growth or decline in students across the city. One of the recommendations was for planning for a new school and a path forward for the downtown library. And one thing Planning Commission stressed was that good schools are important in attracting and retaining young families. So I thought that was important to show you. Chapter 11, Parks and Recreation. We updated this section based on the Parks Master Plan. We created new maps indicating the location of each park with descriptions of the facility, which was something totally different than what we had in the previous plan. Chapter 12 is transportation, and in this we incorporated the transportation study for the James City, York, and Williamsburg prepared by the Hampton Roads Transportation Planning Organization. What that happened is we had the HRTPO do a study for us at free of cost on our transportation for the 3 jurisdictions, because the 3 jurisdictions are basically doing our comp plans about the same time. We updated all the road, traffic, bicycle, public transportation, pedestrian, and rail information. And we provided updated maps for the recommended and approved improvements. And you'll see again in there, for instance, like Capitol Landing Road, we had a map that shows the intersection improvements. We had a map that shows the road improvements for the other section. So what we try to do in this plan is do individual maps for any of the improvements for those. Chapter 13 is utilities to include, we updated the water, sewer, sanitary sewer, solid waste. We did the wireless communication to include cell towers, small cell wireless facilities, solar facilities, and connected and automated vehicles were all updated. Chapter 14 was environmental management. This was pretty cool. This was the new soils map. When you look at that, that's the one with all the pretty colors on it. We also can plan on taking and doing that, a link to that, so that if you want to go in and see a site even closer, you can do that. We did the shoreline access and stormwater management information was updated, and we also added a new sea level rise section along with another map that shows the sea level rise for the city and the area. And the link is to that also so that you can go in and make it larger so that you can see different areas of the city better. Chapter 15 is basically the recommendations for all the other chapters. We decided to still keep that in one spot. And so all the recommendations are in one location at the end of the comp plan. And then, of course, this is our proposed new land use map, which shows those two changes I mentioned previously about 530 Mill Neck Road and the Pocahontas Trail site. And with that, that's all I have. I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Well, Carolyn, thank you. I know you're excited to get this behind you. You would like us to approve this right away so that you can move on to retirement without the burden of a comprehensive plan under your
I
things
built
to
a
do.
buffer in there.
Yeah. Well, there's obviously a lot of work goes into this, and I'm still marveled. I mean, I remember back in 2000s when the comprehensive plan was real thick, and it was a strategy of ours to slim it down. I'm glad to see that we didn't make it bigger, but they're very comprehensive, and I certainly do appreciate all your work and certainly that of the Planning Commission. Having been working on this now for 27 months or so, 28, and obviously the pandemic didn't help you all in timing. So you answered one of my questions, which was about how we coordinate with the counties, and so you had said that we're still kind of in the same cycle because that
Right.
was a strategy of ours.
I think James City County is gone to the board, and it comes back to the board in September, I've been told. York County, I think, is a little behind us. I don't think they're going to get to the end of their process until probably the first of the year, I was told.
Right. And that's helpful so that staff can have conversations with one another so we can make sure that particularly the properties that buffer, the jurisdiction lines kind of make sense with each other. So, and so for some other reasons. So, Vice Mayor, do you have any questions or thoughts?
Yeah, just want to say, Carolyn, echo the mayor's remarks for all of the hard work that you and your staff and Planning Commission put into this document. I will say, having looked at previous documents, the maps were beneficial to, the additional maps were beneficial to me. I don't have any questions right now. I'm sure I'll have some going forward, still trying to get through it and absorb the information. But overall, I think it's an excellent document, and it'll be great for the city to get this approved and move forward.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Carolyn.
Reset the clock for when the next one is due. So when's the next one due?
Once you adopt it, then it's 5 years from the adoption date.
Okay. Now, at your public hearing, there were two concerns that I remember seeing, one of which was the Spotswood Golf Course. Is there anything that talks about, we heard in the city video, sort of the idea of maybe doing some housing there. Is there anything that addresses that?
There's a section in the comp plan. It was the same as in the previous comp plan. Basically, that section talks about the Spotswood Golf Course. The Spotswood Golf Course, I believe, is zone RS1 currently. So that's our big lot, big house development. The comp plan talks about the potential to go to a more denser use with a rezoning. So I think we envision going to RS2 and then possibly a PDR, one of the PDRs. So the comp plan, that section, I can send you that section in the plan and that specifically talks about email on that. But that's the vision for that. To get more density, it's got to be a rezoning. And we're thinking RS2 and then from RS2 to possibly a PDR, depending on what type of a development that comes in there.
You mentioned another school. Does the comp plan also envision increasing pre-K facilities?
Well, that's why we changed our recommendation basically from in the beginning, when we started this, we were looking at an elementary school. So now it just says school.
Okay.
So it could be a pre-K, it could be an elementary. We know there's a need for that. And until that shakes out as to whether it's a pre-K or an elementary, we changed it specifically in the plan to just say school.
So that's flexibility in the
That's
framework.
flexibility.
Oh, thank you.
I would like to also triple echo everyone's thanks. It's a well put together document, and I particularly liked all the visuals. I'm a map person, so they're very helpful in the pictures and the colors and things like that. I also appreciate the explanation on the 2 parcels of land that are being rezoned, because I was a little curious about them. And I also like the way that it's laid out with the recommendations, because it makes it easy as you're going through one section to see the recommendations and make notes on those before coming back. As with the others, I really don't have any questions at this time, and just appreciate the hard work for the comprehensive comp plan.
Yeah, that's one of the comments we kept getting from individuals, was that you'd had to, if you were reading a chapter in the previous plan, you had to go all the way to the end to figure out what the recommendations were. So this time, that's why we specifically put the recommendations for the chapter in that chapter, and then copied them over into a little different format in the implementation end of it, so that it would be easier to know what was recommended rather than flipping back and forth.
Thank you.
Certainly echo the sentiments of council. Carolyn, I know the comp plan, maybe more so than the GIOs and the budget, is a real labor of love in how long it takes, and you certainly had a lot of hurdles thrown at you. So I'm sure you're excited to get it behind you. I'm sure planning commissioners are excited to have one less meeting per month in review of the comp plan. I'm excited too, but there's a real confluence in some of the things that it's working towards, wireless facilities, affordable housing, with also, I think, a lot of the goals of council and our GIOs. So I'm looking forward to officially establishing it and voting on it in September. I had one question, though, just about the sea level rise. I remember sitting in, probably multiple years ago, in some Zoom meeting talking about the areas of James City County that might be at most risk of sea level rise. Were there particular areas of Williamsburg that would be as well, since we are
The closest we
little
come
bit.
to sea level rise affecting us is this area down by College Creek, in that area.
okay?
And even at that, if you look at the maps, it's not that great.
Okay.
You've got that area, and you've got a little bit up here in Queens Creek, but the elevations for the city are such that we are not as affected as a lot of our adjacent jurisdictions with low-lying areas. So, you know, as you all know, we built on the ridge here, and then it sort of comes down in the direction. So, but basically right here down at College Landing and over here at Queens Creek at those 2 areas.
Good. Well, again, thank you very much. I'm looking forward to getting more into it in September, but no further questions now.
Thank you.
Yep, and so we will have an opportunity Thursday, because there was a public
Yes.
hearing on this, and so I think.
So, yeah, staff's recommendation is today was to give you the overview. On Thursday, you have the public hearing. And then if there are any comments or questions or direction for staff, we can work on that in the next month and come to you in September, hopefully for adoption.
Yeah, so I think, Mr. Rogers, you had said digging into it in September, I think.
Right.
If all goes well, we'll be able
Between
to.
now and then.
Right,
Right.
approve it in September. So
Yep.
come Thursday, if you have, more, you take some time to go through this, and if you have any concerns, let's talk about that Thursday, or additions or changes. Let's get that to staff so that they can have something for us to approve potentially in September.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Murphy. Okay, that takes us to item B on the agenda, legislative update. Ms. Shelton?
Here are members of council. We do this every year. I try to give you the highlights of what happened in the General Assembly. Just as my disclaimer every year, it's not intended to be an exhaustive list of everything that the General Assembly did. It's just to hit the highlights and give you some notice of things that are likely to come before you in the future in terms of ordinances and decision points that City Council may have. So we're going to start with House Bill 1778, which adds the definition of clutter to the state nuisance laws, which is defined as mechanical equipment, or household furniture, containers, and similar items that may be detrimental to the well-being of the community when they're left in public view or for an extended period of time. So this is a definition that's added to the nuisance section of the code. You'll see a housekeeping ordinance to bring this into the city code. And the way we enforce this is exactly the same way that we would enforce any other nuisance. We have the right to go on the property and abate and enforce it with a tax lien on the property. Virginia Human Rights Act, House Bill 1848, adds discrimination on the basis of a disability as an unlawful discriminatory practice under the Virginia Human Rights Act. This simply brings this into the state code. It's already part of federal law, and we're required to comply with federal law, and this is more or less identical to that. Marijuana, as it relates to employment, House Bill 1862 prohibits an employer from discharging, disciplining, or discriminating against an employee for the use of cannabis oil pursuant to a valid certificate or prescription issued by a practitioner for the treatment of a diagnosed condition of the disease of the employee. Now, that doesn't mean someone can use cannabis oil at work. It doesn't mean that someone can come to work under the influence of cannabis oil. It simply means that their use of it off-duty is provided by a physician or a practitioner, as that's defined by the state code, and we can't discriminate against an employee for that use. I would also note that we have obligations under federal contracts and federal grants. We also, under state law, have to provide in those contracts as a matter of law that someone that we subcontract with or contract with has to provide a drug-free workplace. We're under the same obligations when we enter into contracts under federal law. Marijuana usage in small amounts has been, and I'll talk about this a little bit later, has, as you know, been legalized in Virginia, but it has not been under federal law. House Bill 2161 prohibits discrimination in public accommodations, employment, and housing on the basis of a person's military status, and that's defined as a member of the uniformed service or a reserve component thereof, or a spouse or dependent of the same. In the special session last year, there were a number of election bills. There were also a number of police reform bills that I'm going to talk about, and so I'm just going to briefly go through the highlights. This is, again, not intended to be exhaustive. There are a lot of technical amendments and issues with respect to the registrar, but just for purposes of council, it provides procedural reforms for casting and processing absentee ballots, including the creation of a central absentee precinct. We already have a central absentee precinct, and that's in the registrar's office. It also requires the establishment of drop-off locations for absentee ballots. Again, we already have that as a result of the last election that we went through during COVID. House Bill 1890 is a long bill with a lot of provisions in it. And I'm going to talk about a few of those. They prohibit actions which will result in the denial of or abridgment of a U.S. citizen to vote based on race or color or membership in a language minority group. And it creates what's called a covered entity status based on having more than 5% of your population consisting of a single language minority, or if the locality contains an Indian reservation and contains 5% more of voting age residents who are a single language minority. So basically more than 5% of your jurisdiction don't speak English as their native language well enough to participate in the electoral process. And if you are a covered jurisdiction, then you have to provide election materials in the subject alternative language as well as in English. It also creates a covered category of practices, for example, boundary line adjustments to precincts or changes in polling places, which are covered practices. So years ago, City Council went through the process of being exempt from preclearance on a federal level because we had remedied those conditions under the Voting Rights Act of 1964. This put some of those provisions back into effect on a state level. And so if you're going to do something like change the boundary line of precincts or change your polling place location, then you have to go through a preclearance process, which can either be notice and a public hearing, and then time for people to object to that, or you can submit the proposed action to the Attorney General's office for certification that the Attorney General has no objection. However, even if you do that, if there is a complaint that you have somehow violated someone's right to a free and fair election, you can still be sued, and it creates a private right of action for someone to sue the locality on that basis, not just the Attorney General's office. House Bill 1968 permits the Electoral Board or the General Registrar to provide in-person absentee voting on Sundays. House Bill 2081 prohibits any person from knowingly possessing a firearm within 40 feet of a building or part of a building that's used as polling place, and that includes 1 hour before and 1 hour after polling. There are exceptions for law enforcement and people who live within that 40-foot area, or security officers when their employment falls within that 40-foot area. That will impact the municipal building during election season because our central absentee precinct is in the municipal building. House Bill 2165. So when someone is delinquent on their real property tax, we send notice and we end up filing a petition to have the property sold. And after that point, we can agree to enter into payment arrangements for someone to pay that, which will stay the court action. That can be for 36 months. This bill extends that to 60 months. House Bill 1902 prohibits food vendors from dispensing prepared food in polystyrene containers. The implementation for this is staggered, so large food service chains, and that means 20 or more locations under the same name and serving basically the same food, are required to comply by July the 1st of 2023, and all food vendors are required to comply by 2025. However, the locality is enabled to grant one-year exemptions to individual vendors on the basis of economic hardship. It's a $50 penalty if you serve food in a polystyrene container. That can be brought by the AG's office or the City of Williamsburg. The penalties are deposited either in the State Litter Control Fund or with the locality. DEQ is required to post on its website information on compliance and a place for filing complaints. City Council is going to need to adopt an ordinance to comply with this. House Bill 1919 authorizes the locality to establish a green bank to promote investment in green technologies. So green bank is basically a fund to serve financing investments or providing financial support for clean energy technology in the locality. This is an interesting bill because it allows the locality to exceed general requirements in its tree replacement and conservation ordinance in certain circumstances, and that includes impact to stormwater, recurrent flooding, formerly redlined areas, and comprehensive plan requirements. But it's not effective yet. The bill has to be reenacted in 2022 to be effective. It directs the Secretary of Agriculture and Forest and the Secretary of Natural Resources to convene a working group to make recommendations regarding policies to conserve mature trees and development, and to increase tree canopy in communities and encourage the planting of trees. So hopefully this one will be reenacted next year because this is consistent with some of City Council's previous policy goals. House Bill 1903 authorizes local governing bodies to reduce the speed limit to less than 25 miles an hour, but not less than 15 miles an hour in both business districts and residential districts, which might be something that council wants to consider. I can't think of the last time I went 25 miles an hour downtown.
Chief Dunn, would you make a note of that?
House Bill 1931 adds a family member's medical condition to a council member's medical condition as an allowable basis for electronic participation in meetings. It also expands the number of meetings in which members can participate electronically. So right now you can participate in 2 per year, and this increases it to 25% per year. City Council adopted this policy by ordinance. If council would like to increase the number, we need to amend that ordinance. House Bill 2004 adds criminal investigative files to records which must be released pursuant to a valid FOIA request. So in previous law, criminal incident information was what had to be released, which is the name It's the location of the crime that was committed, the date on which it occurred, the name of the police officer who responded. The narrative, the information from the officer regarding the details of the crime did not need to be released under the law prior to July the 1st. Now that narrative is required to be released, but there are many exceptions to that, and the first is whether or not the case is active or inactive. Active cases are not required to be released under this provision. Personal witness information or victim information is another exception if we're going to disclose confidential information or information on a subject, or if it could interfere with the prosecution of another case, it doesn't have to be released. And so what this has effectively done is now required the police department to pay significant attention to these cases before they're released and redact a lot of information out of the criminal incident information, that is the narrative that goes along with the criminal investigative file. House Bill 2031 excludes personal contact information from information that a public body has to provide when they receive a FOIA request. So this took the existing law and flipped it on its head. So previously, in order to withhold personal information that we received from someone for purposes of communicating with counsel, we would need a specific request that that information not be released under a FOIA request. Now, in order to release it, we have to have a request that we do release it. So this is one opportunity for holding information that was not in prior law. Senate Bill 1271 permits electronic meetings. So as you remember last year, we used the continuity of government ordinance to authorize electronic meetings because it was not safe for everyone to be together in the same room. And then the budget bill last year included language that allowed us to have electronic meetings because it was not safe for everyone to be in the same room. So now this adds it permanently to the Code of Virginia, and the requirements are essentially the ones that City Council adopted. You have to broadcast the meeting, you have to give people an opportunity to participate in the meeting and be able to watch the meeting. And the continuity of government ordinance that we used was for 6 months, and so we adopted that in March, and then in September you needed to re-adopt it. This extends from 6 months to 12 months the time period during which a locality may provide for the continuity of government in an emergency. Police Bill HB 2031 prohibits law enforcement officers and campus police from purchasing or deploying facial recognition technology. If a department already had that in place, they have to stop using it as of July 1st, 2021. There is an exception for automated programs that redact facial details from body-worn cameras for purposes of FOIA requests, but it can't retain, you can continue to use that, but you can't retain any biometric data from that. House Bill 2085 requires localities to include provisions in their emergency response plans to ensure that plans are applied equitably and the needs of minority and vulnerable communities are met during emergencies. House Bill 2207 creates a workers' comp presumption that if someone has died or suffers a disability as a public safety employee due to COVID, that they're entitled to workers' compensation. It limits the time, however, for the presumption from diagnosis to a time frame between July 1st, 2020 and December 31st of this year. So as I said, there were a number of law enforcement bills that were adopted during the special session, and I'm just going to briefly touch on those. House Bill 5024 creates an affirmative duty for law enforcement officers to intervene when they witness an excessive use of force by another officer. Also requires them to render aid to the person who's injured by that excessive use of force and to report the excessive use of force as misconduct. House Bill 5049 prohibits the acquisition of certain military property by law enforcement agencies. There's a list, and you can request a waiver from the Criminal Justice Service Board. Some of the things on the list were caliber weapons that the police department did have, and so we requested that waiver. House Bill 5051 requires the Criminal Justice Service Board to adopt a decertification process for law enforcement officers who engage in misconduct. House Bill 5055 requires that localities can create a law enforcement civilian oversight body, and City Council is aware that we adopted an advisory body. House Bill 5058 provides that law enforcement can't stop for the following offenses: defective and unsafe equipment, a defective brake light, an exhaust system that provides for excessive noise, tinting that's too dark, objects suspended in the window, an outdated inspection or registration, until the first day of the 4th month after it has expired. These are now secondary offenses, so they can be charged if a police officer stops someone for a primary offense, but you can't stop someone for one of these offenses, just like seatbelt law, for example. The bill also provides that law enforcement officers cannot use the odor of marijuana as the basis for a stop, search, or seizure, and no evidence obtained as a result of that can be used as evidence. No evidence as a result of an impermissible stop can be used. So if a police officer stops for one of these things as a primary offense and they find something else, what they find won't be admissible in court. Localities are prohibited also in this bill from establishing these as a primary offense when the corresponding provision in the state code provides that it's a secondary offense. House Bill 5069 prohibits the use of neck restraints except when that restraint is necessary to protect the police officer or another person. House Bill 5099 prohibits no-knock search warrants. It also requires search warrants to be served in daytime unless the magistrate explicitly authorizes it for good cause shown. It provides a procedure for the executing officer to deliver and read the search warrant to the person upon whom it's executed and or the owner or occupant of the place to be searched. House Bill 5104 requires the Department of Criminal Justice Services, a sheriff, a chief of police, or the chief executive of any agency deploying deputy sheriffs or law enforcement to disclose to prospective law enforcement officers, agencies, or jail employers any information regarding misconduct as that's defined in the bill. So that includes arrests of police officers and prosecutions, civil suits that are brought against a police officer related to the performance of their duties, internal investigations, finding official misconduct, excessive use of force, or alleged criminal conduct, or if a former officer's job performance led to their dismissal, demotion, suspension, or transfer. And a law enforcement employer, potential employer, cannot hire a law enforcement officer until all of that information is received. And it also authorizes psychological examinations subsequent to a conditional offer of employment. So you get the initial offer of employment, you go through the background check, you can add psychological examinations as part of that process. So last year, the governor put on hold the illegality of skill gaming machines that are located in convenience stores, including in the city of Williamsburg. He did not extend that beyond July the 1st of this year, and so as of July the 1st, they are illegal to operate in the Commonwealth. It provides a civil penalty of up to $25,000 per device for any person who operates, conducts, finances, manages, supervises, directs, or owns one of these devices in an unregulated location. That basically means anywhere that the state of Virginia doesn't have control over them. The action to enforce this can be brought by the Attorney General's office, the Commonwealth Attorney's office, or the local government attorney. All right, so this is a 287-page marijuana bill, and it would take me probably 5 hours to explain all of it, so I am just going to hit the highlights, and these are decision point highlights for City Council. The bill addresses a lot of aspects of marijuana legalization, and they phase in over time. And in particular note for purposes of council, even though small amounts are legalized, the retail sale of marijuana is not permitted until January 1st of 2024. Localities can adopt a local marijuana tax of 3% for the sale of marijuana in the locality. And that becomes effective July 1st of 2023. Localities can petition the court to hold a referendum to allow voters to determine if the retail sale of marijuana should be allowed within the jurisdiction. That's effective July the 1st of 2022, which means that that would need to be held in November of 2022. Absent a referendum to prohibit the retail sale of marijuana, localities may not prohibit the retail sale of marijuana within their jurisdiction, but the bill does provide that notwithstanding that, localities still have the right to regulate these businesses in local ordinances, and that includes business license and zoning. And that becomes effective July the 1st of 2023. So if City Council wanted to hold a referendum, you would need to make that decision in summer of next year to have it on the ballot for November of 2022. If City Council is not interested in doing that, then the retail sale of marijuana in the city will occur. And the question for City Council is, where would you like it to be located? Because we are able to determine in what part of the city it's appropriate.
The referendum would ask the question, do we want to oppose it?
That's right. If the answer is that the voters do want to have marijuana legalized for purchase in the city, that's the last time you get to ask that question. You get a one shot if the answer is yes. If the answer is no, the City Council can zone out marijuana usage, not allow it in the city of Williamsburg at all. But in 4 years, that referendum can come back.
Okay.
House Bill 2046 prohibits discrimination related to affordable housing. And it prohibits us from not permitting an affordable housing development because it contains affordable housing. And it defines affordable housing as intended to be occupied by families or individuals with income at less than 80% of the median income for the area. It does, however, allow you to consider limiting high concentrations of affordable housing in one location. And complaints regarding any ordinance that we adopt that is not in conformity with this would be made to the Fair Housing Board and enforced by the Attorney General. House Bill 2175 provides for housing protections for persons residing in manufactured housing. And we don't have currently any manufactured housing in the city of Williamsburg. We were, however, required to provide for that in the comprehensive plan. And so there is a provision in the comprehensive plan at the quarter path development for high quality manufactured housing. And this is not the same as housing that you take and put together in pieces. This is housing that goes in one piece, so on wheels. House Bill 2266 amends the licensing of local special events by the ABC Board. So now these are called designated outdoor refreshment areas. The law previously allowed special events to occur 16 times per year for not more than 3 days duration each. However, the new law provides that the ABC Board can increase the frequency and duration of events under the designated outdoor refreshment area. The request to the ABC Board to do this has to be in the form of an ordinance adopted by the locality, including the size and the scope of the area, a public safety plan, and any other considerations deemed necessary by the board. Senate Bill 1298 authorizes localities to create a tourism improvement district. This is like a CDA, for example, to impose service fees on businesses located in the district for the purposes of supporting tourism within the district. And that can include the cost of promoting events, running those events, and capital improvements. This is initiated by a petition of businesses located in the proposed district whose combined contribution to the district equals more than 50% of the proposed fees. Development of a tourism district improvement plan is required as part of the ordinance. So if someone wanted to bring this, they would need to come with a plan for how this proposed fee is going to assist with improving the district. This should be Senate Bill 1261, expands the composition of the Virginia Court of Appeals from 11 judges to 17 judges. A pertinent part for us is that it creates an appeal of right to the Court of Appeals in all civil matters. Now it's not a matter of right, it's a matter of petitioning the court and asking for an appeal which the court may or may not grant. This makes it a matter of right. It provides for an appeal of right for defendants in criminal cases, but it does not provide an appeal of right for the Commonwealth in criminal cases. They still have to petition the court and request an appeal. This has the reality of this is it's going to make litigation more expensive and more lengthy.
Nothing we can do about that.
No. Senate Bill 1108 increases the jurisdictional limits for the General District Court to exercise concurrent jurisdiction with the Circuit Court from $25,000 to $50,000. They have sole jurisdiction over things that are less than $4,500. So this has the potential to make things quicker and less expensive. And I did want to advise City Council about one that didn't make it into this update, which is the tourism tax for stays in hotels and similar sorts of things. City Council had previously, in some of the legislative agendas that we've presented, raised the issue of whether or not third-party sellers selling hotel rooms had to pay the value of the room in taxes for the entire amount that they charged or just what they give to the hoteliers. The law has now been amended to require those parties to pay the tax on the full amount of the room and not just on what they pay the hotel. So next month, you're going to see a slight amendment to the code, the city code, to correct a couple of things to bring it into alignment with that. I'm happy to try to answer any questions that you have.
Just a thought on that last one you mentioned, because there was a period of time where third parties were charging a tax on the full amount, but only remitting to the hotel tax on the portion that was the hotel was collecting, and so they were keeping the spread. And I think that became illegal a couple years ago.
Right, and this helps to clarify it, and the city code will be in front of you next month.
Good. So I think one of the things that we all going to have a conversation about is SB 1406, the medical marijuana retail sales, and how we want to move forward with that, because obviously it's something that's coming. My personal opinion is that, if it is coming, if it's going to be illegal, we probably should find a way to allow for it in our zoning and collect the tax on it. I'm sure our neighbors will probably be doing it. So other than that, I don't have any questions, Vice Mayor.
Thanks, Chris. A couple questions on the COVID-19 presumption. Is there any stipulation whether they're covered, whether it's a vaccinated person or an unvaccinated person?
No, but you do have to have a positive COVID-19 test, obviously. They have to make the nexus between COVID and the disability, but they don't have to prove how they caught COVID. It's just deemed to be compensable under workers' compensation.
Okay. And maybe this is for, does our department use any facial recognition? Chief, I didn't think so, but just wanted to ask that question. That's all I have.
How many of these are things that we asked for?
Very few. The vast majority are things that we've not asked for. We try to be pretty strategic in what we ask for, and most of what we ask for comes about in 1 or 2 years. Lately we've been asking for larger regional issues, which are harder to accomplish, but when the city needs something, we're pretty good at getting what we need done.
Yeah. Well, thanks. And Chris, so there's a lot of information here. Would it be helpful if we had a table that sort of indicates where we need to have legislation locally is mandated and where we have discretion and need to make decisions?
So every year we prepare a legislative agenda for department heads, or a summary of what happened at the General Assembly for department heads. And that's distributed. It was distributed in June of this year. And so all of the department heads are aware of what they need to move forward. And of course, my office is aware of what we need to move forward in terms of housekeeping matters and decision points for City Council. There's no chart, but you're welcome to come and look at the giant binder in my office.
And then you'll feed those to us as the department heads are ready to present?
Right. That's how we've done it in the past, yes, sir.
Okay. A question on HB 5058 with changing a lot of these offenses to secondary. How does it apply to the police DMV checkpoints? In other words, when we've got a checkpoint at a road and police department's checking all these things, can they issue citations for any of these that are now indicated as secondary?
You know, Mr. Maslin, I don't know the answer to that, but I can find out.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. And I had a few questions also, and some of the things just sort of on the nuances, like to Mr. Maslin's question, what happens if, you know, an unsafe or defective piece of equipment causes an accident? You know, are there any stipulations for that? And
I think the issue is that the stop can't be predicated on the unsafe equipment. I think it's more likely than not. I need to go back and read the bill again. I mean, these are pretty extensive bills as they're written, that if the car is already stopped for some other related reason, be it a checkpoint or an accident, that the police can charge for that.
Okay. And on the 1406 with the referendum, I was a little confused. I think you said that if there isn't a referendum, it goes into effect July 1st, 2022?
So the law that allows us to hold the referendum
Okay.
goes into effect July 1st of 2022. That's the point at which City Council would need to make the decision about whether or not you wanted to move forward a referendum, because that has to be approved by the circuit court judge. And so the circuit court judge would then order this to be put on the ballot for the November election.
Okay.
Because on January 1st of 2023, if we have not done that, then we lose our ability to say no if that's in fact what the city council wants to do and voters in the city want to do.
Okay. All right, if I have a few little questions, I'll just send them off to you.
Thank you, Chris, for that detailed report. I think seeing the inevitable that sales of recreational marijuana may come, you've seen some other localities in Colorado and Illinois use some of that revenue from taxation for pretty transformational change. Evanston, Illinois is one I was reading about over the weekend, and some of their policies would work well with our Truth and Reconciliation Committee as it comes forward. So that could be a consideration as we think about the long-term result of that. I'm going to get the number wrong here. It was the House bill that would allow us to go from 25 miles per hour down to 15. I know there are some residential streets that we've heard from that if you are a through street, people treat it as if you are on Richmond or Jamestown Road when you are living, you know, right there and your kids are playing in the front yard. So that could be a real consideration for certain streets that are, you know, have young families on them, or that we've heard from often. I know I've heard from folks on Brooks and Newport that have said people consider the 25 mile per hour to mean 30 to 35, and then they just don't feel safe going out. So reducing that could, I think, be a good win for those communities, and it's nice to know that we have the ability to do so. I have no questions, though. Thank you for that report, Chris.
Okay, so again, thank you for the presentation. Look forward to hearing more about these items as they come forward based on needs, and we'll make the necessary actions. So now that takes us to item C, presentation and discussion regarding the American Rescue Plan Act funding and the planning for time and for investments.
Thank you, Mayor. Ms. Stammer is going to come forward and talk to us a little bit about what we know now about the ARPA and the funding in the city, and then we'll finish that up with a little bit of a discussion about how we're going to plan for the plan.
Okay, this afternoon I wanted to take a little bit of time to get an overview of the American Rescue Plan Act of 2021. And I wanted to cover funding objectives, timing of payments, the interim final rule, at least in regards to timing of expenditures, what's eligible, what's ineligible, a little bit on compliance and reporting, and then discuss the staff recommended next steps. So the purpose of the funding, it was launched to support COVID mitigation, prevent the spread of COVID, also to replace lost revenue for governments, and to also strengthen support of public services, to support also the immediate economic stabilization of households and businesses, and also to address some of the inequities that has occurred in certain populations or communities concerning the economic impact as well as the access to public health services. So this speaks to the timing of the payments, and as most of us are aware now, it's coming in 2 tranches. The city will receive a portion, or the largest portion through the state, for a total of $15.5 million flowing through the state. And then we receive a smaller portion, of $2.9 million in total, directly from the Treasury. We've already received both of the first tranches, so we received $7,757,512 from the state, or through the state, and $1,452,319.50 for a total of $9.2 million. We can expect the second tranche to be received in June or July of '22. And then in terms of expenditures, we can go back and pick up any expenditures from March 3rd that are eligible from March 3rd forward. We have into December 31st of 2024 when we must either spend or commit the funds, and then we have through December 31st of 2026 to complete the projects and expend all funds. So as the ARPA funds started becoming available, a lot of municipal leagues and organizations such as the Government Finance Officers Association began to give some words of wisdom, if you will. And one of the 3 reoccurring, or that there were consensus on among the various entities, was a reminder to take time and be deliberate, to determine what programs would have the most beneficial impact or be the best investment for our community, to collaborate with our partners and the community, and then just to remember that it's coming in 2 tranches. And so while we may know the total amount that we anticipate receiving, we need to bear in mind the cash flow in terms of timing of receiving revenue and expenditures going out. And again, we have a quote here about just take our time to be deliberate. Community feedback can help officials determine where their greatest needs are. And that's from Tom Reynolds, who's the Maryland Municipal League's Director of Education. And then there are 4 broad categories of eligible expenditures. And the first one's public health emergency, and that's, of course, to respond to the public health and the negative impacts resulting from that. Then there are essential workers, so it's the response to workers performing essential work during the emergency, and also provides premium pay for certain eligible workers. Then the third is to replace public sector revenue loss, and that's to help provide government services, and then the water, sewer, and broadband infrastructure. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about each category, starting with the first eligible expense of public health emergency and economic impacts. And within that category, it breaks out into 4 criteria, if you will. And of course, the first is the response to COVID-19, and that would be mitigation, and also to address some disparities in the community in terms of health care and impact. Public health and safety staff. So this is to help with payroll and benefits in the COVID response. And one of the difference that the ARPA funds have compared to CARES, in CARES we had what was considered a presumptive clause that meant we could, if you were public safety or human services, you could assume that you were involved in the response. And this gets down more directly to being time actually spent in response to COVID mitigation. And then the third is rebuilding public safety capacity. And so this would include rehiring public safety staff that maybe, public sector staff that, a lot of communities had to lay off or not hire, have hiring freezes, that type thing. It also allows to get unemployment insurance trust up to pre-pandemic levels, and also for internal capacity, which is data. And you're going to hear a lot about data through this. But this would be the collection of data to determine what areas of need there are and what the response should be. And you'll hear a lot about proportional responses. It would include hiring consultants if need be, and also information technology in order to collect data and analyze data. And then 4, delivering assistance to households, and this can include such things as food, rent, mortgage, utility, legal aid to help prevent evictions, and also cash payments. And you see that I have that starred. And again, that goes back to making sure that any payments are proportionate to the impact, and also adhere to any other federal guidelines that have been issued in regards to payments and amounts that are eligible. Number 5 is supporting small businesses and nonprofits. And again, this would include COVID-19 prevention and mitigation, for instance, helping with safe reopenings. It would also help them rebound from the economy through loans, grants, in-kind services, and even counseling. And then 6 is impacted industries recovery, and it's specifically in the interim final report mentions tourism, travel, and hospitality. And it says other industries can be included, but again, it has to be proportionate to the impact that occurred to tourism, travel, and hospitality. And again, we're talking about things such as mitigation tactics for COVID-19 prevention, supporting safe reopenings, and can also include expansions or upgrades to facilities if those were planned before the pandemic and then delayed because of the pandemic. Improve the efficacy of public health or economic relief. And again, this goes back to helping with administrative costs and also some of the reporting that's going to be required. A fair amount of the reporting asks for evidence-based data and information. So this would include resources to help with data collection, the technology needed for that, and also include targeted consumer research. And then number 8 is disproportionately impacted populations and communities. And again, this would be access to health and social services, housing insecurities, and affordable housing. And I wanted to take just a little bit deeper dive into one of the eligible expenses, and that would be 4, which was assistance to households, and 5, which was assistance to business in terms of negative economic impacts. And so recipients are held to first make sure that an economic harm exists, and then secondly, that the harm was caused or made worse by COVID-19, and then that any response related to that impact would be in proportionate to the type of harm that was experienced. And that again also goes back to making sure that it's proportionate to any other government legislation in terms of acceptable amounts. And you see that I have a star down there, and you'll find throughout the interim, the final interim report, many, if you will, cautions or warning, such as this. And this just denotes that assistance to individuals or businesses that did not experience an economic or negative economic impact from the public health emergency would not be eligible for use. And then this is just some of the examples that we're starting to see on how other cities plan to use funds for this public health emergency and economic negative economic impact. So vaccine clinic, grants to businesses and nonprofits, purchases of hotels to be used as either shelters or affordable housing. And you'll see the water fire event in Providence, Rhode Island, and that was an event that they had annually. It was a tourist attraction event. And they postponed it due to lack of revenues, and so they plan on using ARPA funds to have that event again this year. Blighted housing, grants for home repair, small business assistance, and job creations. And then while we're under this category, I wanted to talk a little bit about when we passed the budget, Council asked us to come back with some type of real estate tax relief. And so we had hoped to have had that on the agenda Thursday. We had a problem with the public notice, and so that has been postponed to September. But we would propose that $750,000 of ARPA funds be set aside for grants for real estate tax relief. Of that, $37,500 be set aside for administrative costs. And any unused portion of this, if any, would revert back to the ARPA fund to be used for other projects. In terms of residential, of course, the primary residents would need to be in the city. They would need to be able to demonstrate a 20% reduction in household income due to COVID-19 and be at 80% or less of the median income for the area. And then in terms of small businesses, we, again, located in the city, we would look for businesses, small business definition of 20 employees, and that would be at any time during the COVID emergency, which I believe begins March 13th of 2020 and concluded at the end of June 21, and a 20% reduction in gross receipts. And the grant that we would recommend would be the difference between what they would have paid at 60 cents versus 64 cents. And if council approves this, we would look to take applications between September 13th and November 30th. Human Services would handle the applications for residential and the Economic Development Office for small businesses. And that brings us to eligible expense number 2, which is premium pay to eligible workers. And so we have 2 ways we could attempt that. One is premium pay to eligible workers of the recipient, or the recipient providing grants to eligible employers to provide premium pay. And so an eligible worker is defined as a worker needed to maintain continuity of operations of essential critical infrastructure sectors. And the interim final rule defines essential work as involving regular in-person interactions or regular physical handling of items also handled by others. And specifically in the interim final rule, it includes the list that I have at the right of workers. And I'm not going to go through them all, but you find things such as health care, public health, public safety, child care, schools, groceries, and restaurants. And then again, a look at what we're starting to see other cities doing. I starred the Memphis, Tennessee bonuses for city workers. We'll have to follow up on that a little bit because obviously there are eligibility requirements that would require that the workers be involved in COVID mitigation or that type of thing for premium pay. We see payments to first responders. We see market value raises for fire, police, and maintenance and operation and sanitation workers. And then again, fireman bonus, and also some funds for grocery and drugstore workers. And then under eligible expense number 3, replace public sector revenue. And I'll walk through that a bit. The first thing that you do in looking at the amount, well, first let me note that we have calculated what that revenue loss will be based on the interim final report is at $8.9 million. And I will note that as I go through here, one specific area that we're concerned, we may see a bit of change in that. But the first step is to start with the full fiscal year prior to the pandemic, which for us would be FY19. And then take an average of the 3 years back of your growth, or use the national average of 4.1%. And then you compare that alternate base to actual revenue based on calendar year for beginning in December 31st, 2020, all the way through December 31st of 23. And this is where we start to see a lot of comments to the Treasury Department. For one thing, you have to take 2 halves of a fiscal year to get a calendar year, so there's some manipulation there. We can use all the funds of the city, but there are certain revenues that you have to back out. For instance, utility revenue is fairly easy to do. But then anything that's not defined by the U.S. Census Bureau in their annual survey of state and local government as general revenue would be backed out. And also any refunds that we've received have, recognized as an expenditure and then received a refund. So it's quite a bit of work, and a lot of questions have gone back to the Treasury asking, well, why not a fiscal year? So we'll wait for the final report, which I understand right now they don't have a deadline for. And then the recovery funds can be used to provide government services to the extent of the reduction in revenue brought about by this calculation and due to COVID-19. And then to the right there, I just made a note, the interim final rule lists specifically that government services can include maintenance or pay-go rather than financing. Infrastructure such as roads, cybersecurity, health services, environmental remediation, educational services, and the provision of police, fire, and other public services. And then some uses that we have seen from other cities, and they're usually infrastructure such as street paving, also some restoring of jobs or frozen position or avoiding layoffs and cutoffs. And then again, you see CIP projects that were put on hold being funded. And that brings us to eligible expense number 4, which is water and sewer infrastructure and broadband. And so water and sewer infrastructure, the projects need to align with the EPA's Clean Water or Drinking Water State Revolving Funds eligibility. And we are encouraged to, with sewer projects, to consider green infrastructure. And then broadband would need to provide service to unserved or underserved households and businesses and reliably meet or exceed systemmetrical 100 Mbps download and upload speeds. And then we just note that for these types of projects, there are other workforce plans and practices in terms of reporting that will be required. And some examples of these that we're starting to see are drainage, stormwater, sewer infrastructure, in some cases expanding the water and sewer infrastructure is typically what we're seeing there. I'd like to take a minute and talk about some ineligible expenses that are specifically mentioned in the guidance. So we cannot make deposits to a pension fund, fund debt service, pay for legal settlements. We cannot make deposits into rainy day or financial reserves. We cannot fund general infrastructure except for the water, sewer, and broadband within the guidelines that the final interim rule specifies, and we cannot use the funds for a non-federal match for federal programs or grants. And then we'll focus on the guiding principles of the reporting. The first is accountability. Recipients are responsible to make sure that the funds are not spent on ineligible items and that there's no fraud, waste, or abuse. And transparency, and this just denotes that the Treasury will provide comprehensive public transparency reports each quarter across all recipients, but throughout the documentation we're encouraged to be very transparent. User-friendly with CARES Fund, and this is 10 days reporting, and we had to turn around at the end of the quarter. For us, it was 5 days because we received those funds through the state, and so we had 5 days, and then the state had 5 days to report to the federal government after they got our information. So this allows for 30 days after the end of the quarter. And then it's focused on recovery, and it prioritizes equity, focus on economically distressed areas, support of community empowerment, encouragement of strong labor practices, and it spotlights evidence-based intervention and hence some of the reporting requirements. And this is the reporting requirements. It's based on your population and the amount that you receive. So the city of Williamsburg falls to the second row. We're under 250,000 residents, but we did receive more than 5 million. And let me just note, the SLFRF is state and local fiscal recovery funds is what that's referring to. So ARPA, or American Rescue Plan Act, but the fund itself is state and local fiscal recovery funds. So we'll have our first report at the end of August, the end of this month, which is any expenditures from that March 3rd date, March 3rd of 21 forward. And also, as I understand it right now, some information regarding our plans. And then our first quarterly report will be due October 31st. And then after that, it'll be due at the 30 days after the end of each quarter. We will not have to provide a recovery plan performance report. And then our recommended next steps. The first is staff recommendations. So we've already started that and are really pretty much finished with that step. And just trying to take a look at what we think would be beneficial investments for the community. And then we would recommend a steering committee review, and that committee would consist of 7 members. I believe the recommendation would be 2 city council members, 2 staff members, a community member, the president of Colonial Williamsburg Foundation, and the president of William and Mary. And we see that happening in September. And we would ask that they reduce or look at the staff's list and also maybe add lists and come up with the top 12 contenders. And then we would have a community survey to ask the community of those 12 concepts to rank their preference. And we would see that survey taking place in October. And then we would have a city council retreat, very much like the goals, initiatives, and outcome retreat that we have, to consider the input from staff, from the committee, and from the community, and planning the investments. So that concludes the presentation. Be glad to entertain questions or discussions.
Thank you, Ms. Dameron. Certainly a lot in there, so I think it is prudent that we do take our time and act, very deliberately on how to invest these funds, because this is the lottery win, so to speak, and there's a great opportunity for us to do things that we wouldn't otherwise be able to do. So I'm looking forward to having more discussions, and I think the plan to put together a committee with some of those folks that you mentioned, I think is an excellent one. If there's opportunities to partner with some of those bigger institutions to enhance what we do through them, I think is a worthwhile endeavor. So I applaud that effort. I'm sorry that we weren't able to get the public notice out, and because I know that was no fault of our staff, but the staff of the publication, because I know council wanted to see that, providing that tax relief for the residents that are impacted by the increase in taxes, and I know that we were all committed to getting that done. So we'll see that next month,
Correct.
agenda. But that's the only item so far that we've targeted to spend any of the funds. All the other things that we're talking about, you mentioned here, are just eligible.
Or eligible. It was just to get out there what's eligible considerations, and I would recommend that when we look at that criteria, we also look at the reporting criteria. For example, with the negative economic impact, they require the recipient to indicate whether projects are primarily serving disadvantaged communities, and to also specify any amounts that are allocated based on evidence, and that evidence of data is ranked either strong or moderate. And so depending on the type of project, there are different reporting requirements, and I think it's good when you make these decisions to think through what are those requirements and how we're going to get that data.
Okay, good. Well, so appreciate all the information today, and I know council's excited about hearing more as it comes forward and participating in that conversation. So, Vice Mayor, do you have any questions?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Amron, and obviously there's a lot of guidance in there about what we can and can't do with the money, but as the mayor said, it's kind of like a lottery win that we've got a substantial amount of money coming that we'll probably never see again in the future. So it's very important that we take our time and make some critical decisions that are going to be truly beneficial for the city. Mr. Trivett, I believe you mentioned this morning that there may be some additional, the state may use some of their money to offer additional assistance to businesses.
Yes, that's right. So one of the things that we've heard consistently as a note of caution is don't rush into the decision process. Take your time, be slow, because you want to see what the state's going to do with their share of the funding that they've received, because they have received their own amount. In fact, there's a special session underway right now to help decide how to allocate that funding. And everyone believes that there will be a state package, particularly for tourism industry. So I think it's prudent for us to wait and see how that pans out so that we don't create an overlap or designate money of ours for a grant program that then goes unused.
Thank you. And I think this is a great plan moving forward, that we take our time and we have a committee that looks at all of the projects and really prioritizes what's best for us going forward.
Drew, could you just expand on your comment about grants and what help may be coming for the school district, independent of what we're talking about?
Sure. The school system, of course, receiving its own allocation as well. I can't recall how much exactly they're receiving, so they have similar stipulations as to what they can use it for and how, and that will definitely be impacting their budget moving forward. So we need to wait and see what they do as well. Is that what you were asking for?
That's good, yeah. So, yeah, thanks for the presentation. I was curious as to why we don't have any quotes from Virginia Municipal League or any examples of what other Virginia municipalities are doing.
We had a couple in there, I think, from VNML, but it got a little lengthy. So I think the main point, but as I said earlier, many of the quotes, the consensus when you look at them collectively, focused on taking your time, being deliberate, working with your partners, seeing what other levels of government are doing, and then just keeping in mind the timing of the revenue streams based on expenditures in terms of cash flow.
Focusing on number 3, the loss of revenue, which we've talked about before, and thanks for the updated calculation, 8.9 million, using the latest federal rules.
We use the guidance in the federal rules, and then GFOA, it also came out with a calculator, so once we calculated it, we passed it through there, came out with the same number. So we feel pretty good, at least based on as the rules stand right now.
So if we're looking at up to the ability to take up to $8.9 million and use it for the general fund for things like police, fire, general services, and recognizing during our budget discussions there was a lot of concern about the financial stability of the city, and also if we were to do that, take that approach and grab that money under category 3, we could do that fairly quickly, and there wouldn't be as much reporting requirements or auditing, correct?
There are some reporting, probably not as much. We have to report, again, how we came up with our calculation. So there are some reporting with that, but not, you won't get into your evidence-based reporting, correct?
And then if we were to do that, we still have the flexibility to use those funds for maybe towards the new police station or something that we haven't budgeted for fully, but it's happening on our side of the equation and not being part of it.
We're using replacing the funds that we would have used for to provide services and using ARPA. So yes.
That's one option we could look at in terms of simplifying things.
Correct.
Thank you.
Thank you for the presentation. Appreciate all the hard work and the different examples that have been provided. With some of the little reading I've done, I think there's a multitude of uses and options and thoughts that all across the country are coming up with. You've mentioned a couple times the interim final rule. And at this point, did I understand you say that we have no idea when the final rule might come or
That
whether
is
there will
correct.
even be a final rule?
Ms. Kelly, I think, was involved in a webinar today. Emily Brock is the liaison with Government Finance Officers Association in Washington. I believe she's the one that said there was no 1,600 questions. So they got a lot of questions to answer. So.
Is there any concern with doing something based on the current interim final rule and then putting something in place and then 6 months down the road, them saying,
well,
oh, we've changed our mind?
I will sleep a little better when the final rule comes out, but I will also say that as they give this guidance, one thing they've been very clear about, there's no, like, I can't call up the Treasury and say, well, this is what we have in mind and this is our rationale and get a nod of the head. It's on us to make sure that we understand the rules, we're following the rules, and that,
The rules as they are today.
Right, and so I would hope that if anything changes, particularly if it changes down the road a bit, that there would be some allowance in there, but I don't know that for sure.
Well, and to your point earlier, the need for data and keeping very good records and track of all of the communication and allocation ideas is very important.
Which is one reason we'll be, when we bring it next month to appropriate the funds, that we will request we set up a separate fund. I just think that would be the way to do it.
Yeah, thank you very much.
The need for that data and review, I think, is also very important. I was actually surprised at the number of examples we saw from other localities that have already decided how to use significant portions of their funding. Would you say that some of our peer groups that might be in VML with Williamsburg are taking a similar tact as our city from a timeline standpoint of bringing together
I think if you look, you see a lot of larger localities that maybe have different resources and probably more staff to be thinking through this earlier. And I think largely what I'm hearing is that other localities are waiting and following the guidance to see, to collaborate with partners, and as Drew pointed out, to find out what the state's going to do with some of this money, because you don't want to end up offering, say, some sort of grant or program that then's not going to be utilized.
I think also, Councilman Rogers, that we've really benefited from taking our time with this, and we'll continue to do that because we get to follow and see what other people are doing across the state, not just here in the region. So, the city belongs to the Virginia First Cities group, and we've had a couple of calls at the city manager, CAO level to see what everybody's plan is. And it's sort of interesting because the plans really do vary from locality to locality. Many localities are not doing a public process at all. Lots of localities are strictly investing all of the money they've received in infrastructure, sewer, water, and broadband, because that's the easy, most eligible expenses. And a lot of localities are not like Williamsburg and need to make that investment. So this is really a very fortunate moment in time for our city to find ourselves not needing to plug a budget hole, not needing to make major investments in infrastructure, and have this opportunity to decide on wise return on investment types of projects.
Yeah, and that being said, I'm glad there was a significant time that will be given to the public to also weigh in on this. The reporting method, I believe it said a report after the end of each quarter. Is that ongoing until all funds have been expended,
Yes,
likely years into the future? And
Yes,
would that fall to your office?
it would.
Okay.
One thing that I think we mentioned it, but we haven't really pushed it very hard, is that the guidelines, correct me if I'm wrong, Barbara, but the guidelines do allow us to capture a certain amount of the money, I think 10%, to apply
For
toward
administrative.
administration. So I'm glad you pointed out the amount of work that will be required just to report,
Right.
Because there will be some administration required, not only in managing the money, but also administering the projects associated with it.
Sure. Well, and we saw that as the one little bit that has been expended right now for the tax relief. There's a portion of that
Right.
for the administrative level. Well, thank you very much for your report, Barbara. I have no further questions.
Thank you all. All right, so we're all good on that. So that takes us now to City Council communications. Does anybody have anything they'd like to share? Vice Mayor? Maslin?
No.
Okay. Schedule of meetings, Mr. Trivett?
Sure. The ARB will meet tomorrow at 6:30 here in the Stryker Center. The Business Roundtable is canceled. EDA will meet at 3 o'clock on August the 11th. We'll be back here for City Council on the 12th. ARB will meet on the 16th to do design guideline review. The Planning Commission is scheduled for August the 18th, and the ARB again on the 24th at 6:30.
Thank you. So that takes us to our second open forum opportunity. If anybody has anything they'd like to address council with, please come forward and state your name and address. Thank you, sir.
Hi, my name is Cody Armstrong. I'm a student at William and Mary. I spoke last month at the Planning Commission's talk on the 4-person moratorium, and I just wanted to provide my voice to council as well. A lot of students, I've talked to them about this, they think it's a bad idea to go through with the moratorium. A lot of that's what I've heard and what's been said has been not really critiques of this program, but rather critiques of students and students' existence in these neighborhoods. And I really want to stress that students have a right to exist in these neighborhoods at the amount that they do. We make up 50% of the city when we're all here, and a lot of these students live year-round in the city once they are a resident in these houses. And the reason I stress the 4-person rule is because 4 people, these houses are more affordable. Now, a lot of people come with, but Midtown Row is now in place. That should be a place where all these students can congregate, but it's not affordable. I have a friend who lives in Midtown Row, and they actually sent out a schedule of what the payments would per room allowance. In a 4-person apartment, it's almost $1,000 rent per month per person, whereas in these 4-person rentals, it's about, I think, a few of them are $700 to $750 per person. So that's a very wide difference. So to get rid of this 4-person, to implement the 4-person moratorium, that could be a slippery slope that leads to the removal of this 4-person exemption, could remove lots of affordable housing for students, because I can see a route that goes there. I know there's a lot that needs to be changed. Parking needs to be fixed. Noise needs to be worked on. But these are things that the community needs to work together on and not divide students versus year-long residents. So yeah, I really hope y'all do not approve of the moratorium on Thursday.
Thank you, sir. Anybody else like to come up? Welcome, Dr. Crambiel.
Apologize for the condition I'm in. I had to go to the skin doctor this morning. It's the bandage. David Crambiel, 201 Harrison Avenue. First of all, I want to stress that in my 50 years here, 25 years on the Burns Lane area and 25 years living in the Harrison Avenue on the other side of the college, that I believe that the vast majority, the very large majority of those of us who live there chose to live there because we like living with students. So I feel saddened by impressions that were just said. They're real, obviously, sent with meaning. But what we're here for is to, in my opinion, is to create a pause. I don't like the word moratorium, a pause. We simply rethink the very good points that are in the four-person rule, and we think about modifications and changes that make an even better policy going forward. And then we have to address the very important issues of balance, which is why this whole thing is about balance. And that balance involves whether we have homeowners or renters. And if we talk about homeowners, we have to think about the distribution of what kind of homeowners. We get the issue of affordable housing and other income levels that can afford houses in these areas. And if we talk about renters, we have to think about a balance because we have competition between students who want to live there, and we have people, families and whatever, who can't afford a house or they're here temporarily, they need to rent a place. And what better place to start exploring what you might eventually buy or rent permanently. So we have families who want to rent. It's a very complicated balance, and what we need is a pause where we just go back and create new modifications and create all of the best ideas everybody can bring forward and come out a whole lot stronger, so we act as a community of every one of us renting, owning, whatever level income, whatever we have, that we're all working together to create Williamsburg the kind of community, stress community that we enjoy and we love. And so I'm thinking very positively. And let me just say that as a person who has purchased a house and rented it to students, it's a fantastic experience. People pay $650, and with two people in a two-bedroom place, we're not suffering from income. And in very fancy places with a porch and with a screened-in patios and so forth, we maybe charge $700. And the good news is we have lots of student housing available right now, so we don't have a crisis. We have time to think and come up with the best possible future for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Would anybody else like to come forward? Seeing none, I'll close the open forum, and I believe we have a closed session. Nope. Somebody? No. Yeah. So, Mr. Vice Mayor.
I move to go into closed session pursuant to Section 2.2-3711 of the Code of Virginia for the purpose of discussing one personnel matter per subparagraph 1 concerning appointments to boards and commissions, and one legal matter per subparagraph 8 for the purpose of consultation on specific legal matters requiring the provision of legal advice by counsel concerning state legislation.
Second.
Mr. Rogers?
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey?
Aye.
Mayor Pons?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Dent?
Aye.
Mr. Maslin?
Aye.
Okay, so we will go into closed session and be back shortly. Thank you very much.